Hey everyone, what up? Kaiser here. Final Fantasy is going strong throughout this new decade. Next month again Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well as Final Fantasy XIV 7.0 are coming sometime soon, probably next year. And I might go far and say that we might have some more exciting FF projects soon. Wink wink. But we also had some good small stuff. I mean, we got the amazing Crisis Core reunion and the Pixel remasters on consoles. That aspect has actually now made almost every numbered single-player Final Fantasy game playable on modern PlayStation consoles at least, with Switch being slowly closed. And rest in peace Xbox, you have my condolences. But there is still at least one, or should I say 3 games still missing, and if you saw the title of this video, then you know I am talking about Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels. Now, for a fresh reminder for those who are unaware or may have forgotten a bit, when Final Fantasy XIII came around in 2009 and 2010 on the PS3 and Xbox 360, it was met with mixed reception from fans and critics. Many have praised the graphics and the music and even say the combat sort of. But others just criticized the story, the characters, the overall overuse of linear game design, and oddities within said combat. Not helped to the fact that the development of 13 was rough to say the least. So Square tried their best to recuperate by giving us 2 sequels, one being Final Fantasy XIII-2, a game that did its best to improve upon 13's issues, and Lightning Returns, a game that was really experimental and unique with its direction, even if it was, for lack of a better word, just weird. Those, however, weren't highly successful. As while Final Fantasy XIII did sell really well, the sequels really didn't, and many consider them to be nothing more but a black stain on not just Final Fantasy, but also on Square Enix as a whole. Well, I mean, nowadays that bit's not remotely true. But that was way back then, and this is now. Not to mention, like with every other Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy XIII does have its fans, and same goes for the sequels. And with the trend of Square remastering or remaking the older games they had for a while now, especially when it comes to Final Fantasy, what better choice than to have the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy garner such treatment, with the 3 games being remastered for this current generation of consoles, as I desperately believe it needs and deserves one. And I know someone is thinking right now and is saying that, why would Square waste money on remastering Final Fantasy XIII when those games are bad? Well, I like to counter that argument by saying that they did remaster Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy XII, and Final Fantasy II with the Pixel remasters, and those games aren't really 100% well beloved by everyone, as much as say the other titles. But anyway, without that tangent out of the way, in this video I'm going to talk about why and how the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy can get remastered. But before I begin, if you like what you're seeing here, then by all means like the video, click that subscribe button, and hit that bell notification if you're into RPGs and you want to see more RPG videos from yours truly, as well as even things of Final Fantasy in general. And with that said, let's get on to this video. So why does Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy need a remaster? One, mainly for its accessibility. As mentioned in the opening, Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels are pretty much the least accessible single-player mainline numbered FF games. Well, I said single player because obviously Final Fantasy XI is also missing, but that's an old online MMO, but you get the idea. As a result, the current chance of playing them is either A, with the PC versions on Steam, or playing them on Xbox One/Series using the 360 versions via backwards compatibility. And, well, the former isn't exactly great when the ports themselves aren't great either, with the worst offender being 13.2, and while the latter case are probably the best option, but even then I hear issues, especially on the Series S and X, where 13.2 and Lightning Returns do have, well, of course, issues. Another would have to be is that with just the right touches, it could give some fans of the trilogy a reason to buy and play these games again. And who knows, maybe those who weren't a fan of them could give it another shot. Because sometimes giving a game a second shot could sometimes help a game, or maybe not. It's always sometimes best to take another shot. Now we go on to how these games can be remastered. Now, I really do think that it is essential for Square Enix to truly add some things and, put a real lot of effort to improve these three games. So not only that they can fix some of the issues the original releases had, but also truly encourage people to play them. And if they do well, it could, provide sales, possibly more money, what Square would like. Now, before I fully go on to each entry on what they could improve, I like to pitch some general miscellaneous ideas that you normally get for a remaster, such as the games having like 4K and 60 FPS, stable and well-designed 60 FPS, hopefully, putting them in one physical and digital package like with Final Fantasy X's Remaster and of course Kingdom Hearts, and maybe adding some like cheats or features like 2x or 4- speed if possible, and for these remasters to be accessible on everything: PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, because they really deserve it, Nintendo Switch, if possible, and PC, with better ports please. Now, with that done, let's go on to detail on what all these three games need, starting of course with Final Fantasy XIII, the first game in the trilogy, and there's quite a couple to go through. Now, of course, I want to reiterate and clarify that remaster does not mean remake, so no thinking about them trying to redesign the levels or make them, less linear, as well as trying not to rewrite the story. That's not what the remaster's job is. No. And with some ideas I borrowed from Night Sky Prince, Reliable Prayers, and Ramses, as well as even Box and J. Quilliper. I hope I'm saying that right. Here are some ideas I think could improve Final Fantasy XIII 1. Now the first thing they should immediately do is switch Pi members mid-battle. When this game came around, the only puzzle thing it did have was being stuck with whoever the game forced you to play as, and this was really present for a long time until you reached to chapter 10, and even then it was more than just halfway through the game, and even then that character will be your leader character as the only character you get to play in a turn-based game. Like this, seriously, this is something that only Persona 3 FES in the original game could only be proud of. But honestly, stuff like that, especially for a game that came in 2010, especially for a turn-based game, was really frustrating, as it just leaves to really frustrating designs. Like, if the leader character dies, then it's game over. regardless even if your party members are still alive, or the fact that you can just only use one summon. This was an issue that Final Fantasy XIII 2 much improved with its combat system. I think they just could, remove that dying gimmick, and that would be great for a multitude of reasons, as one will make not only the combat, more strategic and less limited, but also give you things like having access to 3 summons rather than 1. Another thing, of course, would also be just like adding, 4- speed or 2- speed, is adding a dash function like, say, Crisis Core Reunion and Pixel Remasters of Final Fantasy 1 through 6. These levels are honestly quite a slog to go through, especially with the speed you're going through, and you are just mostly trapped into fighting enemies who sometimes could block your way, and there might be occasion where you really don't want to fight them, and you really don't want to go to this repetitive loop of find them, then walk, find them, then walk, maybe even cutscene and all that stuff. Yeah, like the pacing especially is really off during gameplay, and I think they could avoid that by, having a dash function where it would not only help speed through all these long linear levels, but also avoid even fights in general. Another thing that they should also add is having things like revisit areas, like say a chapter select like with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XV, or hell, even give like say a fast travel as an option. FF13 just has some really gorgeous looking levels and some awesome moments, but the sad thing is, you cannot go back to them again unless you create a new save file or replay the game just to see them again. In fact, the only place you can actually revisit is Grand Pulse, but that's in a specific area in, like say, the final dungeon. Another thing they should also have is adding options like hunts and side quests in past areas aside from Grand Pulse, which could also improve the content a little bit more and give a reason to go to these past areas you've been through. Another I would like to also add is to rebalance the battles and the summons, as in like improve the pace of regular encounters and bosses, so that making staggers are a little less tedious to go through, and also, if possible, have them drop gil. And also to improve the summons so their damage output isn't 100%, don't feel like, useless, or they just don't feel underwhelming, like really improve the summons a bit. And another thing that they should improve is of course improving the Crystarium and making it, less limited and, less like heavily forced in a say. I think that as well as like balancing them and maybe even do a similar system where you could just, you could cancel all the points you spent and just so you can just try on a new class or spend them again, since some games do allow you to do that, as well as being able to save your paradigms just like in Final Fantasy XIII 2 from what I recall. Others would have to be adding like New Game Plus and hard mode of course, and this may be a tough call, and that is to improve the graphics. Now, don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy XIII looks gorgeous and has aged well visually, and same goes to an extent with its sequels. Well, maybe except Lightning Returns. And if you play this on a PC and the new Xbox consoles with the visual bumps added, they can truly look wonderful. But I do know that Square can do better, and besides, the engine for these games are a bit of a mess. So I do think on what's handled, and obviously if they could just get much improved graphical improvements with using much better engines, just like they did like with Crisis Core Reunion, Neo Replicant version 122, and even, though not Square related, Xenoblade Definitive Edition, as well as also Metroid Prime Remastered. if they can manage to salvage the code of those 3 games and put it on much better engines like say Unreal Engine, or something that not only just looks great and improved, but still faithful to Final Fantasy XIII's art style, it would be honestly the best of both worlds. Now last one is a bit of a stretch, and that would have to be, if possible, for them to somehow salvage and retool, remake that canned, dummied 7th Arc DLC they had, with obviously whatever tools and assets they could use. I know it's a little redundant given that the extra boss that appears in Final Fantasy XIII 2, but I do think will be cool or somewhat to somehow recreate that area and give us that piece of content which they could not achieve on the original release. Games like, again, the Replicant version 1.2.2 and Xenoblade Definitive Edition has added stuff like Ending E / Episode Mermaid, and of course Future Connected. And now before I move on to the others, like with the graphics, this will likely be certain, but I'm pretty sure that the devs would also have new arrangements of the soundtrack for all 3 games. And while that does sound awesome, I still really hope that they just leave an option to, have players choose the original soundtrack over the remaster, just for preference. And with all I had to say about 13, we've now moved on to 13.2. And now we head to Final Fantasy XIII 2, the sequel. And to be honest, most of what I apply to Final Fantasy XIII can be the same applied for this one, such as graphical improvements, improved frame rate that does not lag, as well as other features like dash and improved speed. Now, while Final Fantasy XIII 2 does already improve a lot of 13's game issues, I do think from what I can gather, especially like say from YouTuber Ramses, by the way check him out, he's awesome, that there could also be some improvements to Final Fantasy XIII 2. One is fixing the audio mix, cause from what I heard the sound quality of Final Fantasy XIII 2 is kinda off. Another is to add a New Game Plus option in hard mode, just like with Final Fantasy XIII and obviously Lightning Returns, as I think it doesn't have that, or maybe it does. Actually, I think it does have New Game Plus, but obviously Final Fantasy XIII 2 and 13.1 should have a New Game Plus mode and hard mode, especially when you have the whole monster catching gimmick, and you can have an idea of having the strongest monsters at the beginning of 13.2 and hard mode as a challenge. Another is just to have a better PC port, and others is to also have bonus console content like costume DLCs, which sure, not all of them will be feasible since some are licensed and I don't think Square will be able to renew the license and get them back, but if possible, maybe they can even add some ideas like having costumes from Lightning Returns and of course 13.2 and apply to say Final Fantasy 13 with Lightning. And this also goes for technically Lightning Returns, but also maybe even have some costumes from the sequels applied to, obviously the characters in 13, because some of the characters of 13 in the sequels have different costumes, and I think it would be interesting, like have a costume from Final Fantasy 13.2 for Snow to apply to 13.1 Snow, for example. As well as obviously we could also have the episode DLCs integrated in the game, which I'm sure the PC version kinda does have it, but as well as similar to how Final Fantasy 15 Royal had it and Final Fantasy VII Integrate, as well as maybe some guideway to players on the whole structure with its non-linear structure and other quality of life features I may have missed. And even apparently Final Fantasy XIII 2 also had some cancelled DLCs of their own and just other ideas that didn't make it in the final game. Now, this may be asking for way too much, and this might not even be feasible, but if they can somehow implement it for 13.2's remaster, then that will be good. And lastly, if possible, which may be an option or not, is to somehow turn off, those random encounters as an option, since lots of FF games that had random encounters will have an option to turn it off. But with that, of course, that ends Final Fantasy XIII 2, and now it is time for the last one. And now we've reached to the final point of the trilogy, and probably the most polarizing one out of the lot, and that is Lightning Returns. Now, to be honest, I don't know much about this game other than I hear it has some really oddities and see some complaints about its design. So I'm going to list a few that from what I can gather and know and what they could sort of improve, but there might be some that might be impossible. So one, like the other two, is obviously get a graphical overhaul, as this game really has not aged the best, especially with the budget, and clearly the engine was really put in flames, especially on how the water looks, just the bad looking textures, and that poor dog model. Oh, that poor dog. Another thing is also to add all the bonus costumes and even transfer those costumes to Final Fantasy XIII, and even a bit of, like, say, Lightning 13.2 during the lightning segments for her to wear at least. Another, of course, is having improved 60 FPS, especially when the FPS boost on Xbox really looks whack, especially with the chocobo racing with the camera. Like, oh my god, it looks a little bit whack. And another complaint that I hear some people say is that when you're fighting enemies you don't get EXP, so if they can somehow maybe have a way to implement EXP during fights, that would be good and would encourage fighting. I know side quests are the main gimmick of this game, but honestly I think, especially when I heard how pretty good this combat system is, they could somehow just add a little bit of something to encourage more fighting. Obviously, even though it's time restricted or something. Another, if possible, is to somehow do something with the clock, like with the timer, like how with the Atelier games recently been ways to, either remove the time limit completely or manage it somehow, like say with the Atelier remake, giving an unlimited mode. Now, of course, I just said remake, so obviously I don't think they can somehow, create an unlimited mode for Lightning Returns, but if they could somehow manage the time limit in a more convenient and easy ways that makes it less stressful for players, then I do think that would be beneficial. Though what I ask, of course, with all these DLCs and other ideas and all that stuff, is maybe too much for what the studio or team, whoever is doing this. Like, I don't think it's like Square's main team, like they'll probably have someone outsourcing it, but hopefully whoever it is, hopefully they get a lot of money and budget to really improve upon it. Another is to improve just the movement of combat a little bit, doing combat, just improve the movement a bit. And yeah, that's probably from what I know and learned, that could be done to improve online returns. And there may be some extra stuff that I might have missed on what could be improved for all of these free games. So if you play these games, if you play these games and if you have an idea on what could be fixed with these said games, then please write down in the comments of what these free games could be fixed with a remaster. And then we now cut back to the video. So yeah, overall I do think Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy does deserve a remaster, and hopefully Square Enix does put a lot of effort and makes some of these essential changes to really improve these free games. Hopefully just to sometime in the near future they can do that, especially given the fact that obviously it's those three are like the last single-player mainline Final Fantasy games that haven't been, re-released and playable on like PlayStation, and obviously they also deserve a chance on Switch. And given that those three games are, to my knowledge, now off Xbox Game Pass, I do think that they really deserve to obviously, get remastered, get more attention and love put into it, and obviously that would honestly help, people enjoy. That'll help, Final Fantasy XIII fans to give another reason to buy these games and play them and enjoy them. And as for new fans, they could, maybe give it a chance. And for those who didn't like Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy when it came out, they could, give it another chance, see if these remasters do it for them. And if it does, that'll be great. If not, well, at least they tried. But anyway, that's about it. So if you guys have any comments on what you guys would like to see changes in the Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy when it comes to remastering these games, then by all means, let me know in the comments down below. I'll see you guys in the next video, so Mad Kaiser, out.